The HOPE consortium represents a complete supply chain solution. It addresses vaccine transport, training, sourcing, demand planning, and digital infrastructure, and vaccine availability across the world.
Etihad Cargo's role within the consortium as the national airline of the UAE and as the cargo partner within the consortium is key to the success of creating Abu Dhabi as a global logistics and transportation hub for the COVID-19 vaccine.
For the HOPE consortium, we're building up a dedicated container fleet with a service center located in Abu Dhabi to make sure that this consortium has dedicated resources to bring vaccines from the world to the world.
Abu Dhabi Ports is ready to play a leading role in the end-to-end supply chain, including first-mile logistics, storing, processing and redistributing this extremely time and temperature-sensitive product.
Maqta Gateway is committed towards creating innovative digital solutions to boost the transparency and the integrity of the region's supply chain.
Here at Rafid, we are proud to actively participate in serving the humanity during worldwide COVID-19 pandemic.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Maintaining vaccine integrity through all stages of the supply chain requires never-before-seen levels of monitoring and coordination. Technology is playing a crucial role in enabling end-to-end safe, secure supply chain operations, protecting vaccine integrity. This session will look at the role of technology as a fundamental part of a complete integrated logistics solution for efficient vaccine transport and distribution. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome on the virtual stage the panelists, and they are Mr. Stephen Cahill, Director of Logistics and Field Support at WFP, Dr. Noura Al-Bahri, CEO of Maqta Gateway, Mr. Richard Ettel, co-founder and CEO at SkyCell, Mr. Jack Muse, Regional President, Middle East, Indian Subcontinent and Africa, FedEx Express, Mr. Robert Sutton, Head of Logistics Cluster at Abu Dhabi Ports. I'd also like to introduce the panel moderator of this promising session, Mr. Richard Thompson, Editorial Director at Mead. Please welcome them.
Well, thank you, Yusuf, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Ensuring Supply Chain Integrity. This is a special panel discussion on the challenges of maintaining vaccine integrity through all stages of the supply chain and logistics process. My name is Richard Thompson. I am the Editorial Director of MEAD, the Middle East Economic Digest, and I will be your moderator for this session. So maintaining vaccine integrity through the COVID-19 immunisation programme involves never before seen levels of monitoring and coordination. And technology is playing a critical role in ensuring end-to-end safety and security. In this session, we will look at the role of technology as a fundamental part of the complete integrated logistics solution for vaccine transport and distribution. And to discuss supply chain integrity, I'm delighted to be joined today by an absolutely wonderful panel of leading experts involved, most of them in the HOPE consortium, and who are here to give their insights on technology and on the challenges of ensuring vaccine and supply chain integrity. First, we have Dr. Noura Al-Bahri, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Maqta Gateway. Welcome, Dr. Noura. Richard Ettel is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of SkyCell. Hi, Richard. Jack Muse is the Regional President for the Middle East, Indian Subcontinent and Africa for FedEx Express. Hi, Jack. Robert Sutton is the Head of the Logistics Cluster for Abu Dhabi Ports. Hi, Robert, welcome. And Stephen Cahill is the Director of Logistics and Field Support at the World Food Programme. Hi, Stephen, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for your time today. Robert, I'm going to come to you first. Just really to set the scene at the sort of the macro level, how is the HOPE Consortium approaching the massive challenges involved in this vaccine programme? And what are the sort of specific challenges that are unique to the COVID-19 immunisation programme that you wouldn't normally have to deal with?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I guess we should start with the word integrity, right? Because if we think about the supply chains as a whole, then of course every supply chain looks for integrity as a core part of its offering. Now, what's unique about the COVID-19 vaccination programme is if you think about the aspects of the digital temperature monitoring across vast geographies, across not just 20 pallets or anything like that. We're talking millions and millions of vaccines and billions of doses. So the integrity that we're going to have to apply and the technology has to be able to support in the COVID-19 vaccination programme is unlike anything we've faced before. It needs to be able to apply that integrity, whether you're moving the vaccines across the US, whether you're moving them across Europe, or whether we're, as HOPE Consortium, moving them across our neighbouring countries, Africa, Middle East, CIS, and into South Asia. So these are very unique challenges. We've looked at this in multiple ways. The way that we approached this was we built a very solid physical supply chain with our partners in the HOPE Consortium. And then to support that, we wrapped around that a very clear digital enablement program. That digital enablement program allowed us to leverage existing and new technology. So we were able to track and monitor and make sure that we had complete visibility of the vaccines in the COVID-19 program throughout their life journey from production to patient. And I'm sure that my colleagues will be talking to that later in this.
And just to find out a little bit more about how unique this particular programme is, what you've just described, is that the normal level of activity or attention that you have to play to the supply chain integrity, and it's just simply a question of scale, or are you actually having to introduce new components of integrity as well?
It's a combination of both. And if you think about a traditional supply chain, then goods are typically tracked through a milestone or an event in that supply chain. If you look at the COVID-19 requirements, they go much further than that. They go into the field hospitals. They go from the field hospitals onto the nurses' station, from the nurses' station through to the patient. So it's much. There's a lot of detail upstream. There's a lot of detail downstream, which means that we need the new tools, we need new technologies, and we need new visibility layers, which are instrumental to giving us that end-to-end supply chain integrity.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Robert. And I've got loads more questions for you, which I'll come on to once we've been around the panel. Dr. Noura, if I could come to you now. So Robert talked about the scale of the challenges and the important role of technology in maintaining integrity of the vaccine through the supply chain stages. How, perhaps you can give us a bit of detail in what technology you're using, how the technology works, and what are the particular challenges of that, the technology challenges of maintaining integrity?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. From my point of view, technology is the power behind our COVID-19 response. Working alongside science and the partnership through technology, we are able to deliver the vaccination around the world safely and efficiently. As one of the founding members of the HOPE Consortium, Maqta' Gateway is delivering a fully integrated digital solution that will solve logistical issues relating to the planning, the physical movement, the tracking, and the delivery of the vaccine locally and globally. It would not be possible without technology to efficiently run the operation, optimize the routes, and gain real-time visibility. Working in partnership with the Hub Consortium and Abu Dhabi, my hope is that the world-changing technology will help many more people and deliver hope into the future.
Now, my knowledge of Maxa Gateway is that you provide a blockchain-based solution. So, is blockchain a part of this this program, and is that important?
So, Maqta Gateway has been developing solution for the past years for the entire trade and logistics in general. One of our main, I would say, advancement is also in the blockchain. And blockchain, and particularly when it's applied to the vaccine supply chain, is fundamentally critical to the integrity of the vaccine supply chain cycle. Our custom-built digital system, which we call Immunity, uses blockchain, but also other technologies for integration to track and trace the COVID vaccine, sourcing, storage, shipment, and all the related data in real time at every step of the vaccine journey. The blockchain main role is to deliver the utmost transparency, improve the traceability, increase efficiency, and most importantly, provide high level of security. Our Immunity featured a robust end-to-end visibility for every vaccine, starting from the manufacturing facility to the arrival of the vaccination centers in the UAE and other destinations worldwide. Based on the availability of the data, the system has the capability to track individual vaccine doses up until the time the administration of the dose it's happened, as my colleague have said. This inspires me every day to think about what can we still do in this domain, and absolutely blockchain is one of many technologies that we are using to support the Hub Consortium. So
in terms of the vaccine integrity and the supply chain integrity, your responsibility is from the upstream end of the process. You collect the vaccine from the producer all the way down to the administration at the downstream end, and the blockchain ensures there's a sort of secure tracking of each individual dose through that. I mean, that must be an enormous amount of data and moving bits and pieces. How does that compare to sort of the normal level of logistics in a sort of pre-COVID world? I mean, is this unprecedented?
So we have developed the solution specifically to the tracking of the vaccine, but the technology has been there for the past years. We have built our first Silsal blockchain project between us, the Port of Antwerp, and MSC in order to track the vessels, right? So we have managed through our proof of concept to track vessels, to track containers from the point of origin all the way to our ports. Now, we took this, of course, after a track record of successful transaction that Maqta overall is doing, more than 46 million transactions we have. We took the same technology and we looked at the details of the actual supply chain in hand. As Robert said, there is much more complexity when it comes to the upstream and the endstream. So we have offered the blockchain as one of the integration points for our partners. But this is not the only point, because we do have other technologies as well that are part of the Immunity package. Those other technologies are there designed in order to be scalable and flexible, because depending on the technical readiness of the destination country, then you can really select what solution that fits this destination country. So this is why we have integrated the blockchain as one of the options, but we do have also the traditional, usual integration ways also for Immunity.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Noura. Again, I have many questions that I would like to come back with, but I have to give the other panelists their moment as well. So I'm going to move on now to Richard Ettle. Richard is the co-founder and chief executive officer of SkyCell. Hi, Richard.
Hi.
As a general question, I'm curious to know from you about the main logistical challenges associated with the vaccine, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit about SkyCell first, and in particular some of the sort of the storage and technology issues related to this particular vaccine program?
With pleasure. So Skytel was founded 10 years ago with the challenge in mind in global pharma distribution. Distribution of pharmaceuticals is temperature, humidity, but also shock and vibration sensitive. So it is important to safeguard not only vaccines, but also other kinds of pharmaceutical products from these various environmental aspects. Temperature can impact the quality of medicine, but it can also completely destroy it or makes it toxic. So on the one side, storing the information, how it was transported and stored is equally important, but our job is as a packaging provider to safeguard the temperature, humidity, and also shock and vibration during the logistics process. So from the point of manufacturing until either at a hub, for example, here in the HOPE consortium, but then also onwards to the distribution sites, or then even further to the doctors and patients arm. And here our contribution is, on the one hand side, the container technology that we've developed, and on the second side, also the experience that we've collected over the past 10 years in vaccine distribution. So we do about 80% of the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world in global vaccine distribution. So we have a lot of know-how in transporting vaccines to more than 90 countries. So it's also about software, how you can assess the risk if you want to ship, for example, from a manufacturing plant in Belgium, from Italy, because we're talking about when we do vaccine distribution, we have multiple vaccine manufacturers today. This is a good situation to be in, but they also have multiple origin sites. They may have subcontractors, so there are reasons why they're manufactured in India, in Italy, in Belgium, in the United States. But then the receiving countries are equally diverse. And then usually the receiving sites tend to be in very challenging environments when we talk about distribution to Africa, also to the Middle East because of temperature, and then also to the wider ranges in Asia Pacific, where we have very large populous destinations.
So is that the biggest challenge on this particular program, and perhaps more generally, the varying conditions that you're having to encounter in each distribution point? It's having that adaptability. Is that the biggest challenge?
Yeah. So I think on the one hand side, it's the requirements of these different vaccines. It's for the first time that we have a mass distribution of vaccines that require deep frozen -80. We now see -20 degrees Celsius popping up, and then back to the very known 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, which are still a challenge in global vaccine distribution. So that's just from the manufacturing side. But then on the distribution side, I think we have never had this challenge in almost mankind before, to quickly roll out a vaccine, because the longer we let it out there, the more mutations we will see. That means the longer the global pandemic will endure, and potentially the more additional vaccines we need to develop. So the faster we equitably can distribute vaccines, the better we can get it under control. So I think this is also one of the motivations here to form HOPE, was to really distribute the vaccine also equitably to Africa, so that we can also avoid that new variants just pop up and then we have to vaccinate the rest of the planet again, because we were too slow rolling it out everywhere.
So presumably you, and I'm guessing here that you're constantly monitoring the temperature inside the containers all the way through the different journeys from the collection points to the distribution points. So you're getting a vast amount of real-time data tracking these temperatures and collecting it somewhere and monitoring these thousands of container units. How are you doing that, and what did you have to do to gear up the capacity to do that?
First of all, logistics is all about preparation. And so it's equally important to first define, and this is why it was so important to find partners that have a similar vision on how you want to set up infrastructure. That you agree on what are the milestones you would like to have in a supply chain. Because once you have that understanding, what are the different steps in the supply chain, you can effectively monitor them. You don't want to monitor every single point. You want to look at, are we hitting the right milestones? And if there is a deviation, then you need to be able to take action. And that requires other members of a consortium or resources within the business. So you can automate a lot, but first you need to define those milestones. And I think this is here the opportunity that we've built a platform where you can basically say, I need to put in the -80 vaccines for delivery, -20 or 2 to 8, and we can effectively bring them to the various countries. So it's really a strong platform for all kinds of countries to latch onto, and then they can get the vaccines from the various manufacturers and ensure that it's the same quality they will get the vaccines into their countries.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. It's an absolutely fascinating challenge that you're dealing with. So thank you for your expertise there. Jack Muse, if I can come to you, you're the regional president for the Middle East, Indian subcontinent and Africa for FedEx Express. So that's one of the giants of the logistics industry. So you have established networks, logistics networks for more conventional operations. How have you had to change, and how adaptable are the traditional networks that you use, and what have you had to do differently?
Well, let me give you just a brief history. We've been in business now for 47, 48 years as a company. We have over 650 aircraft. We service 220 countries. And probably one of the better opportunities we've had is that these customers that we're talking with today that are manufacturing vaccines have been customer of ours for long periods of time. So from that perspective, we have a known quantity, our known customer, and we know a lot about what they do and become a more effective partner for them. I think the other thing that's critically important here as it comes to the specific vaccines, we fully agree it's some of the most important work that we've done in the history of our company. And I think for the reasons that have already been stated, it's incredibly challenging to make sure that we're getting stuff to the right place and at the right time. But to the what we're doing, what we've changed, we work very closely. We've already had existing relationships. We work very closely with the manufacturers. We've worked very closely with the API producers, the pharmaceutical ingredients. We've worked very closely with them to get them to the manufacturers. We work very closely with customs agencies around the world to make sure that once the product arrives, that it flows through customs seamlessly. So those things are things that we've done in the past, but we've ramped up, obviously focused intensely on trying to make sure that this product is available when it's needed. And about the scale of it, and I think it's a really important question because there has been some concern about the scale of this, and I think early on somebody said it would take 1,000 747s worth of capacity to distribute this vaccine around the world. Just to give you an idea of the scale of just FedEx, that's 1 week's worth of capacity for us. Now we know that so we know that this capacity is not needed all at one time, right? It's going to be over the next 6-12 months that we're going to continue to distribute this product. So we do have capacity, and we've got strong competitors in this arena too that have capacity. We have other partners. We work very closely with the airlines around the world to move volume as well. So we've got partners. So I want to assure the public, while this is massive in scale and critically important, we do have the capability to distribute these vaccines around the world. And companies like Richard's, we work very closely with, not just on the container size packaging, but also on small individual packaging. So those are steps that we're taking that we're very excited about, and we're committed to supporting this effort to get these vaccines out for all the reasons that everybody knows and that have been mentioned on this call.
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the themes of this panel is the technology aspects of the program, and Dr. Noura mentioned the use of blockchain as one of the systems that the HOPE Consortium is using and that MACTA Gateway provides. Is blockchain something that is sort of standard for the global distribution and logistics industry and for FedEx Express, or is this, where does blockchain and other technology fit into this?
Well, let me start by saying I hope that blockchain becomes standard. It is going to be a critically important component of any distribution network in order to get us so close to real time. And I think for all the reasons that Dr. Noura mentioned, it has to be a viable option. I mean, people are going to be very concerned about the authenticity of products that are being shipped, and blockchain is one of those ways that this can be assured, and either through a public or private, and we hope for public network that allows FedEx to work with the manufacturer. Imagine if the ingredients were coming out of someplace and we were able to verify the authenticity of those ingredients to the manufacturer once they came from the manufacturer as a vaccine, be able to verify it all the way to the destination or into the arm of the patient. That's very exciting, and that's a capability that we think we can support, or we know we can support, that we think it should be coming on very quickly. But I think there's another step that's been mentioned, and Richard mentioned it in his comments too, and that is, what kind of sensors do you have? So vaccines is one of those that's very critical, not only to make sure that you have the right ingredients and the right type of custodial control over that, but also that it's maintained the temperature in order for it to be effective when it gets in the arm. So we've developed what we call FedEx SensorWare ID. What that does is pair up with the blockchain capability, and so that you can not only, you can track that from an ingredient all the way to a shot in the arm, and that you will also be able to see that it was moved in the proper amount of control. And we think temperature a lot with these, but Richard correctly mentioned there's shock, there's shaking, there's light that might have tracked it, and all those things can be tracked by this sensor. So we think these are very exciting things, and we're, you know, in a lot of development, you're always in the crawl, walk, run, and we're in the crawl now. We want to work with teams like the HOPE Consortium so that we can light up blockchain on the logistics so that we can see the movements and verify the movements. And then importantly, very importantly, work with governments and hospitals at the other end to understand what their requirements are for it, so that they get all the data they need, and they know when they give that shot in the arm, when they give that vaccine, they're highly confident that it's not only the right ingredients and the right vaccine, but also more importantly, that it's been cared for in the entire journey. So it's an exciting time and important work.
Indeed, thank you very much. And again, so many questions arising from your comments there. I want to bring in Stephen Cahill from the World Food Programme before we sort of go around with some of the follow-up questions. So Stephen, you are the Director of Logistics and Field Support at the World Food Programme. And I'm quite curious, I mean, I think of the World Food Programme as primarily a food distribution organisation, and this is a vaccine immunisation programme that we're talking about. So where does the World Food Programme fit into this, and is it the same thing, or is it quite a different process?
Great. Thank you, and just like to say with fellow guests on this, it's a really rich conversation. And WFP, yes, our primary work is in food. We feed about 115 million people every year, and that's not just one-off feeding. We're really feeding the poorest of the poor. But based on that 4 million tons that we move is supply chain. It sits at the core of what WFP does in those 80 countries, and we're very, very good at working in supply chains in complex operating environments. So of those, 220 countries that Jack referred to, is the 80 ones are the really difficult to reach, hard to reach populations of the world. So some of the most vulnerable, some of the most forgotten populations that we've got. And we need to ensure that those people get the same access to vaccines. As Richard well pointed out, that as these variants, and we're seeing these more and more every day, unless we start vaccinating the whole of the world, these are going to continue to run. And WFP really has its core in working in these kind of areas, and that's really where we can bring this in. So we already have been working for a number of years in the health environment. We started really with Ebola outbreak in 2014 and 15, cholera in Yemen last year, the different then Ebola outbreaks in DRC last year as well. And then as well last year, because of what happened, especially in the aviation industry, WFP had to set up its own operations in order to support the movement of PPEs and auxiliaries around the world. We moved 148,000 cubic meters last year to 173 countries, setting up that operation from nothing. And that is because, in essence, the aviation industry did collapse last year. And I think that part of what we can do is show the private sector as well about how to absorb these shocks, because we're so used to absorbing those in a kind of a more specific context. But we need to be able to ensure, as we assume that not only these pandemic shocks are going to become more frequent, but also as we're seeing climate change, that the private sector is able to absorb these shocks and ensure that the normal supply chains run.
And so from what you've just described, I mean, the challenges that you're dealing with, that we're already dealing with a very complex challenge, but you're dealing with particularly difficult geographies and territories with all sorts of other issues. What for you, for the World Food Programme in this immunisation programme, what for you are the biggest bottlenecks or the biggest sort of challenges? Is it technology? Is it civil war? Is it, what are the things that are causing you problems?
I think we saw last year that technology was able to cope. I mean, we, as our headquarters are in Italy, we were the epicenter of the outbreak almost exactly a year ago. There was nobody in headquarters, and we ran our operations. And actually, we increased the number of people that we fed. So it really proved to me is one that technology allows, I think, a second round of decentralization. Our major issues are really to ensure that there is this ideal towards equity, ensuring that countries don't look at their own agenda first, that they really have this viewpoint is that until the world is vaccinated, nobody is really safe. And when we look at the number of vaccines going to the poorer countries at the moment, which are, I think, 400,000 for the total, and if you look at the population of Africa being 1 billion, it's very, very small. And there needs to be this consideration that countries need to let go, and Richard referred to what's happening in India at the moment. Countries need to let go and think of the bigger picture, and that's the big issue today.
Okay, and just final point on technology before I move on. We've heard from 2 or 3 of the panelists about blockchain, sort of cutting edge technology, but we've also heard that, there's different tech capabilities in different countries. So what sort of technologies are most realistic and most practical for you as well as effective?
That's a very good question. And again, we're working in very low tech environments in general. There wouldn't be reliable mobile coverage in many cases, but data is incredibly important to what we do. Unless we have that data coming up from the ground, we're not able to see about when to restock, about where our breaks are, when to take immediate action. So really, we need to have the ability to convert that kind of data into informed decision making. And if we lose that power, then we're lost. And that's really what we need to make sure. We also have, I think, seen, again, where the private sector has been able to support us with this data integrity and pulling data together. Companies who are, this is their bread and butter, but they've really helped WFP support that. And it's really made our decision making much quicker and, most importantly, very decentralized.
Okay. Now, Richard Ettle, I can see that you raised your hand, and then Dr. Noura after you. If I can come to you first, Richard.
Thank you. I think what technology companies can bring to the table is a mindset also how you can do 10 times more with not 10 times the amount of resources. So how can you make a leap in improvement? I think this is what the technology companies can bring to the table, whether that's on software, but there are also a lot of hardware innovations. I mean, just to give an example here in the vaccine distribution, we started now in the more like parcel side distribution, because this was basically the maximum output that some of the plants were able to deliver. So it made sense to start on a parcel level. Now, as we are going to the mass distribution, where we're talking about on a container level, 30 to 40,000 vials, this is changing the dynamic. Before you had a limitation because of maybe dry ice to maybe only put 200,000 vials on a plane just because of dry ice limitations. And with better technology, you can bring 1.5 to 3 million vials on a plane. So this is what technology can do. I think the second part, as we are making this ramp up, is what is the risk in the supply chain? How is it increasing? There was an article recently that in India, at least 8% of vaccine are lost due to temperature deviation currently. And so as we are ramping up, actually, we're putting even more product at risk the absolute amount of product at risk is even increasing massively. So we have to look to technology and also process improvements, how we can massively reduce this, because every vaccine that we're losing is not one patient getting it. So, and then as this number ramps up, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that could have gotten a shot earlier. So I think the risk here and how can we mitigate the risk is something we really need to improve.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Noura, you also raised your hand during Stephen's comments. Can I bring you in?
Yeah, thank you so much. Just like the comment about, I'm just trying to take you all back to the 2019. 2019, the perception and the perspective about technology Companies were looking and government were looking at technology as either a threat or an opportunity. People who have looked at it as an opportunity, of course, they are the one who did not get distracted. And the people who looked at it as a threat and didn't change their business model, had more difficulties. Now, what we have learned after 2020, that technology should not be looked at any longer as an opportunity or a threat only. It should be looked as a must to have, a must to do. It enabled all of us to work more efficiently. So it's very important to change, as Richard said, the mindset. How are we looking at the technology? Is it enablement or is it something that we have to have? Now, regardless if it's a cutting edge blockchain, honestly, I'm proud that we have blockchain in our solution, but pragmatically speaking, it is not the only way, because at the end of the day, we will be dealing with, certain destination where they still have paper base, certain destination who are still running Excel sheet. So this is what is unique about Immunity, that we have looked at the readiness of several destinations, and we said, okay, if you do have the ability to run blockchain, this is how we're going to support you. And if you don't, we're going to take every single form of data. Our expertise in Maqta Gateway, after all these years working with the entire ecosystem of a trade, is about integration. And integration is not about using one sort of technology over the other, but in order to enable all type of integration, so you have the scalability and the readiness to go to any destination and offer a custom solution to that destination.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Noura, is it one of the things we've seen generally is through the past 12 months, the response to COVID has accelerated digitalization in many industries. It's broken down some of the resistance in psychological resistance and the behavioral resistance. Is that your experience? So, you have this cutting edge platform. Do you now find it's easier to get people to sort of listen and adopt these new solutions?
Absolutely, Richard. We have been using the carrot approach for the past years, right? And out of nowhere, the adoption went to 100% because this is the only way of communicating now. I think it's accelerated a lot, even internally within the company. The usage of a lot of tools that we were having, they were there, but people still like to use the board for the physical thing or use. So we all, as even human being, not just as companies, we have learned that we can adapt. We're actually ready. We are ready to adapt. But it's just like we have been stuck in a cycle where we are doing what we used to do, And this is where, out of this pandemic, I think one of the positive impact was the acceleration of the advancement of the technology. Another positive impact that I see, honestly, is having all of us now collaborating, unifying our efforts. Because at the end of the day, it's not us, it's versus you, it's the entire world need to be vaccinated. The entire world need to be supported. And all of our collective expertise together, this is where we learned even further from each other. So I think there was a lot of, I would say, positive points, our lesson learned for humanity that I think will change the way that we think about technology and about our efforts together.
Thank you. Now, Stephen, you were nodding quite vigorously there when Dr. Noura talked about the greater levels of collaboration. So I'm curious to know where you have seen that, how that has manifested in your operations and the benefits, but also whilst we might see greater collaboration within the logistics and distribution, we're seeing this vaccine nationalism in parts of the world, which strikes me as the opposite. So just could you expand on some of what your thoughts are there?
Yeah, no, I think we've seen some arch rivals come in together and really work together, and I think Jack referred to it a little bit as well. And when you look at the size of this challenge that we have, and everyone knows that individually you can't take that on, right? And we've seen that across the UN as well. We've seen that multiple agencies involved. We work very, very closely with UNICEF and WHO. Normally, and because they see this is not just as as a pure health issue or a pure pandemic issue. This goes way beyond this, because the links are the links to obesity, the links to other medicines. If you give priority only to vaccines, what happens with the other vaccinations? And we see that in places with like DRC, which has measles, cholera, which are much bigger killers than COVID today. So it really has pushed us, as Dr. Noura says, to really work together. Again, though, from a kind of collaboration point of view, when countries then look at this and governments look at how they're going to vaccinate their own populations, then I think we can see the ulterior side to that. And that's where we really need to be careful and really, like, one, as individuals, make sure that we're fighting this and look at this as a global citizen. And secondly, make sure that as how can I say, very strong leaders in these areas, that we need to be pushing our governments to have that kind of global view as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, Robert Sutton, you raised your hand, I think, just as Stephen was starting to talk there. So what were your points?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I wanted to kind of build on the message of collaboration, because I think it's absolutely instrumental in the speed of recovery and the speed of addressing the issue at hand. If you look at the way we approach this, as a logistics company, we could have approached the vaccine manufacturers and provided them with a transportation solution. But we recognised very early on that the scale of this is such that no single logistics entity globally has the capability to address this in the time it needs to be addressed. So the way the whole consortium looked at that, we looked at each of the components, the airlines, the equipment manufacturers, the logistics entities, and the digital enablement, and brought all of that together in one package. And we've since extended that now into the medical profession. So we're able to deploy and support medical professionals on the ground, as well as provide the vaccines. And we do this as a unified solution. So we've taken a very holistic view of that. And quite frankly, the only way you can do that is through collaboration. We've had the fortune to work with multiple freight partners. And if you look at the freight partners we have, we're working with 10 of the top global freight partners. Nowhere in my 25+ year history have I had the pleasure of working with so many competitors, all talking about the same thing, which is not about competition, it's about solutions. So the collaboration message is absolutely pivotal.
Just on that point, so hopefully, we get through the COVID pandemic quickly, the vaccine program accelerates the end of the crisis. What happens to what you've just described? So we've got this, everyone's aligned to solve this problem at the moment. You've just said in your 25-year career, you've not had this opportunity where all these competitors are sort of working for the same goals. What do you think will happen next? Can we maintain this in some way for, to improve life, or are we just going to fall back into old practices?
Well, I mean, I guess there are two answers to that, Richard. There's we wish and we hope that it continues. We continue to recognise our obligation to leverage the collective skills that exist across the organisations. I would hope this has been a kind of a wake-up call for the industry, that there are some things more important than an individual P&L or an individual positioning in terms of the global ranking of logistics companies. Collectively, if we're able to resolve this, I would hope that part of that learning and part of that realization that this is culturally and morally the right thing to do sticks to the way that we operate in the future.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jack, you raised your hand whilst Robert was talking there.
Thank you. I think it's really kind of important to think about the benefits of competition as well. I mean, one of the things that we've seen over the years, and one of the benefits our customers have had, is we've become a lot more efficient because we have very good competitors in our field. And so I don't want to lose that in this conversation. But to the point of the question, I absolutely agree with Robert. We've seen some outstanding. We just talked about blockchain. There's a Global Express Association that FedEx, UPS, and DHL are members of. We're working together on blockchain solutions so that it can be an open source and that everybody can benefit from it. When you look at airline industries, all the airlines work very closely together as they try to determine how to be more safe. So I think it would be unfair to say that there's not collaboration, because I think there's a great deal of collaboration. And I do think we have, in the most part, very responsible people in the industry that know when it's a good thing to work together. You know, when you find a global pandemic like COVID-19, yes, they're going to work together. When you see safety issues in the airline industry or the trucking industry or whatever, they're going to work together, because nobody wants that. No business wants to hurt, you know, to make a situation worse by not cooperating. So I think there's some good things, and I do like competition. I'm a free enterprise guy. I think you level the playing field and you get companies like what Richard's doing with SkyCell. I got to see that down with Robert down at the Kazad facility down there, and it was an outstanding piece of equipment that could, you know, make a very positive difference for a lot of folks. So we think that's a powerful motivator as well.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Cahill.
Yeah, and just Richard, it's a great question and really probing as well. And I think you've got to find a counterbalance between kind of what Robert was saying and what Jack is saying. I do appreciate, even I'm outside the private sector now, the competition is good and we always promote that. We also need to recognize in today's world, especially post-COVID, the socioeconomic impact is those people who are left behind can no longer be left behind. We're in a world today where you cannot ignore the consequences of what we are doing in the more developed countries. So when you see migration waves, which we're seeing now in the Mediterranean all over the world, the Mexican-US border, that is not because people want to leave their homes. That is because people are forced to leave their homes. And that adds the private sector need to step into that space and own it and say, we need to push some of these resources back into those populations that most need it. And that's where they need to step in.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to just have one final question on technology before moving on to challenges. Dr. Noura, you've talked about blockchain and the investments in the new technologies. And Richard Ettle from SkyCell also talked about his technology developments and investments. How do they complement each other? You know, blockchain with what the logistics companies are doing. You know, how has that worked in the HOPE consortium?
Thank you, Richard, for that. So SkyCell is providing a very unique experience to the entire HOPE consortium with the container that they are bringing. Having all of these, you know, monitored and together in the contained, you know, cold chain is absolutely important. But Maqta role into this is to get this information from SkyCell and to get other pieces of information, not just the temperature and the location, but also other pieces of information about the quantity, the purchase, where are we storing it, in which pile, in which, you know, room, all of these information, bring them together in a unique dashboard and integrate them together to enable our logistics to work basically out of information. I think it's very important what Stephen has said, that the decision making, the taking quick decision, knowing exactly how to respond to this supply chain if there is any gap, God forbid, it's absolutely essential. At the end of the day, we are the creator of the technology, but everyone who are from the partners are using this piece of information within their basically specialty. So if there is any notification, any discrepancy, we flag them out. And of course, this is what ensures the overall integrity, coming back to the topic of our session today. And this is what we are providing, the transparency, working together with unique, I would say, solution provided by every single member of the HOPE consortium and giving this to every single member.
Thank you. That's we've talked so far about the achievements and the challenges so far that we've overcome, and technology's really been, you know, a central part of this conversation. But I guess there are still things to solve going forward, you know, challenges ahead. So I'd like to go around each of you and just look forward a little bit about what we have to do next, the further challenges. So Jack, if I could start with you, you know, what are the bottlenecks and the challenges that you're facing at the moment, and, you know, how do you see those solutions being developed?
I think for the most part, the manufacturers are doing a tremendous job of growing, but we're trying to get the emergency use authorizations through the different regulatory bodies, and then trying to understand how they want them distributed, when they want them distributed, and how you can ensure the authenticity. So we've covered a lot of those things. We do have a capacity, but I think the point that was raised earlier is a good one, and that is, hey, while we're trying to move vaccines, which is very important, you also are trying to move everything else that keeps the economies going, whether that's other vaccines or whether that's just goods to people's houses. I mean, as this started up, we moved over 2 billion masks for PPE, so there's a lot of things that move in our industry that are more than just vaccines. And I think Stephen mentioned, the different vaccines that we move into Africa, because there's diseases deadlier than COVID that have to go on. So I think that's one of the challenges that we see. And then I think as you continue to move forward, it's going to be, there was a tremendous amount of lift that was in the bellies of passenger aircraft that don't have passengers flying upstairs anymore. And that's impacted a lot of supply chains as well. And so how do we ensure, how do we create the right amount of lift for a lot of different locations, especially with, I think Stephen's point on Africa with underserved locations, that was a significant lifeline for them to get a lot of goods moved in and out. So, we have to look at our supply chains and how they're set up and what can we do, and we're reviewing that on an ongoing basis.
And if I can just ask, where does, for an organization like FedEx Express, which is taking cargo around the world, what do you do the sort of the last mile part of the process as well, or do you hand over to organizations like Stevens to do that part, or what
No, I probably should have mentioned this before, Richard. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. We have over 500,000 employees worldwide, and we have a lot of people that were viewed as essential workers that couldn't work from home because they were out delivering packages. And there's guys just like them, or there's employees just like them at the other delivery companies. And, I got to give a big shout out to those guys, because that was probably the other big challenge that you have as you're trying to get your workforce vaccinated, as you're trying to make sure they have everything to be safe. You're telling them you need to go out to work and deliver, essential goods around the world. So, our frontline teams across, I'm especially proud of the FedEx guys, but across all the delivery agencies around the world, our frontline teams have been amazing, showing up to work, in difficult situations. And yeah, big shout out to the healthcare workers. They've been amazing. And there's so many folks that have done so much. But, these delivery guys have gone out and kept economies moving around the world. And so I think I'm pretty proud of them. And that's a challenge to try to keep, a workforce that can keep them healthy, and we're committed to that as well. So. Thanks.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. Robert, if I can come to you with a similar question. Now, I'm guessing that whilst the focus has very much been on the priority of the immunisation programme over the past 12 months, presumably that has distracted focus from investing in further technology solutions, and there must be gaps that are still there to be addressed.
So Richard, I think there are always gaps. Technology is moving at such a pace that you can't stand still for a moment and say, okay, we've arrived, we have everything we need. I think that what we've seen is to Dr. Nora's point earlier, an acceleration of adoption, an acceleration of how we leverage technology. And if we link that back to a challenge, so one of the challenges that we see in the COVID-19 vaccination program is the risk of wastage. So how do we apply technology so it mitigates that risk? And one of the things we've been able to do is to look at two things: the physical supply chain, so you can build a hub and spoke model, which allows you to monitor and control the flow of goods into a spoke at a rate that the spoke can handle it safely. So the spoke can handle 200,000 vaccines within the temperature protocol, but it needs 10 million vaccines. Then the 10 million come into the hub. We push 200,000 to the spoke. That's the physical element. Now, around that, we've wrapped a digital enablement, which allows us to monitor the offtake of every single vaccine from that spoke into the hospitals and into the patients. And that allows us then to replenish that spoke network across Africa, across some of the more demanding territories, not because we have first line of sight of that facility, but because we have a process in place, and the process is underpinned by the technology that's deployed. Now, whether that technology is a simple push-pull message at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, or whether it's a real-time enablement and real-time visibility is immaterial. What's material is the technology exists, and it allows us to mitigate the risk of wastage. Every single vaccine we waste is a life at risk. So again, that's where technology plays a significant role in addressing and mitigating risks.
Thank you. So we've talked for most of this session on supply chain integrity in terms of the fulfilling the orders and keeping things moving. You've just Robert raised the issue of wastage there. I'd like to go down that route a bit more. Richard, if I can come to you on that, I don't know if this is an area, but in terms of containers and storage and transport, what role can containers play in reducing wastage, and where does the wastage occur? It's not like crops where you might have wastage in the fields. Is it happening in the container? Is it sitting in warehousing?
Yeah, I think great question. I think one of the reasons why we joined this industry is exactly that, the nature of that. One is use of containers. So you have the human element. You need to be able to handle equipment without instructions. So also loading of a container. It needs to be very simple. It does need training. Then also that the container does need specific equipment. So for example, if you have airline equipment, it may be that they need specific trucks, roller beds. If you can avoid those, an example with our containers, because you specifically design them that they could be used in emerging markets, where I think the best case you have is probably a pallet jack, a non-motorized pallet jack. So everything needs to come down to the sort of the weakest link in the chain, and how can you make it work under those conditions. Then you have a very robust solution. The other element is, can you mitigate risk by simulating the risk? So I think software here can play a role in first talking about the different ways how you can ship something. There's usually more one way in logistics. And can you compare what is the risk profile of each of those variants to do it? What is the cost associated with it? Do you have a plan A, a plan B? And I think this is something that we've started to do 6 years ago. We learned a lot of lessons with different pharma companies, learned a lot of best practices. We've collected more than 2 billion data points about different pharma supply chains, what is the best way to do it, and obviously learning from those mistakes. And then being able to look into the mirror every year and do an audit. Am I holding up to the promise that I make? And I think this is what we can do as equipment manufacturers, but then also as the suppliers in this industry. And the pharmaceutical industry is one that takes it very serious. And I think this is the ultimate measure. How many products do you lose every year? And historically, this was with our company less than 0.1%, which we obviously advertise because we're that good. But it requires a lot of work. It requires people. It requires training. It requires the software. It requires really robust hardware and designing of hardware. And yeah, this is what we're very excited to bring to this consortium.
Thank you very much. I imagine that, I mean, I may be wrong on this, but when you've suddenly got this huge escalation of activity around one particular program, that there's inevitably going to be sort of higher levels of waste just because it's all happening so quickly, and then you gradually get on top of it, or maybe quite quickly get on top of it. Is that what we've seen, or is that what you think we've seen in over the past 12 months? There has been a degree of wastage that is improving now, or is it not really an issue?
Well, some pharma companies, this is their core competence. Their core competence is developing world-class drugs and to do a very fast rollout. I mean, this is what Pfizer can really know how to do. And then, for example, BioNTech picked a very capable partner in doing that, specifically with a very challenging temperature range. Others went standalone and actually fared pretty well. But they probably lost more in the process because they've never done it before. It really helps if you've done it before multiple times and you've learned your lessons, especially as you're talking about a rollout to not only one country and not even or regions in that country, but globally, where the world is such a complex place.
And so on that issue of collaboration, we've been talking in this discussion about the increased collaboration. So are those lessons and those messages being shared through the crisis, where some companies have got strengths on, say, the rapid escalation of distribution? Do they share that learning with companies that are maybe not focused on that?
Well, the people that we talked to, the pharma manufacturers, there was little knowledge sharing among them. And I don't think it was because they wanted to keep it a secret, but they thought that their supply chains are so standalone and so unique that there is little that they could learn from each other. I think this has improved significantly. So attending conferences over the past 3 years, there was a massive start of exchange between pharma companies. I think it's also logistics companies here that obviously, like us as a supplier to various pharma companies at the same time, can bring in those sort of missing gaps or these best practices from other players. You're not revealing any sensitive data, but you are sharing this is the best way, for example, to distribute, for example, to a very challenging destination like Congo. This is the different airport capabilities. This is the best airlines that can do it, etc. Knowing these limitations helps a lot.
Okay, thank you. And now, Stephen, if I can come to you for a final word before we wrap up the session, what are the big challenges with regard to the COVID-19 immunisation programme for the World Food Programme? What are the big challenges for you at the moment?
I think there'll be a couple, Richard. I think the last mile that we'd be looking at in some of these very complex operating environments will be a major concern for us. So getting it into the capital can have its challenges as well, but getting it through customs quickly, making sure those bureaucracies, and then really getting it down to the last mile is very, very complex, considering the seasonality we have of this. And 80% of the countries we're working in are conflict environments. So you put that on top of, the safety of our staff. And of course, there's also been allusions to the fact that, this is a high value commodity as well. We've got to make sure that that stays safe from an aspect of both fraud, but also of people trying to get hold of it. My other biggest issue today, to be quite frank, is a repercussion of COVID. It's because developed countries have to put in so much money into their own economies to keep them afloat, is that's going to affect an organization like WFP, which is completely voluntary funded. So we're really out there asking for donors and high value individuals. And we've seen some individuals come out of this extremely well, that they also step in when the world really needs them. So it's really about money. And a lot of the things that we can do is actually dependent on money, and we can do it with that.
So on the basis of what you've seen over the past 12 months, is that financing aspect, is it a real concern at the moment, or is it something you're just worried about that hasn't yet started to manifest itself?
We've seen it manifest a little bit in one or two countries. We feel it's a kind of a cloud on the horizon. I think we need to be aware of it. And there's two sides to it, right? We've seen the number of hungry poor go up dramatically by 30% over the last 18 months. It's now at 650 million people, like over almost 9% of the population, and this is a trend which has been reversed. It was going down for years and years. So, and of course, the socioeconomic impact of countries where they have been, you could look at the flour industry in Kenya, you could look at the garment industry in Ethiopia, which have now been affected by this as well. So there's a kind of a double whammy for many of our beneficiaries as well. So we have situations today, like for example, in Lebanon, where we actually have enough money, but because of the socioeconomic impact, there's not food on the shelves for people to buy.
So just sort of to nicely round off this discussion on tech, if there are fiscal squeezes on the World Food Programme, for example, presumably that's an opportunity to use things like blockchain or other tech solutions.
Absolutely. So, but in the end, you need to make sure that, of course, those supply chains are running. And wastage, I think both, Richard and Robert referred to it, is, of course, in the food industry, a huge area. So we see that wastage in the West is very, very high. And then you see that actually there isn't enough food in many of these other countries in the world. So how do we rebalance that? But if you're able to get a streamlined supply chain and really push those efficiencies, and it goes back to competition again, then you can get more for your buck, which means you feed more people for the same amount of money. And every dollar saved means we can feed 4 people for a full day.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion on ensuring supply chain integrity. I really do thank you for the comments and the insights that you all have brought to this conversation. Sadly, we've run out of time, so I just want to say thank you to Dr. Noura, Robert, Jack, Richard and Stephen for your time, and I wish you lots and lots of success in your endeavours, both on the COVID immunisation programme, but also more generally as well. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
Shukran. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Cahill, Stephen Cahill, and Dr. Noura Al-Bahri, and Mr. Richard Ettel, Mr. Jack Muse, and Mr. Robert Sutton. Of course, we give our thanks to Richard Thompson for moderating this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, with an estimated 8,000 jumbo jets required to transport vaccine doses around the world, IATA has stated that safely delivering COVID-19 vaccines will be the mission of the century for the global air cargo industry. And the challenge isn't just facing air cargo operators. There is perhaps even greater complexity facing ground transport networks. This session, ladies and gentlemen, brings together a range of experts from across the logistics value chain to discuss the most pressing challenges facing the global operation and how collectively the industry can enable networks to transport and deliver mass volumes of vaccines to a wide range of geographic locations safely and securely. With that, we'd like to welcome our panelists, and they are Robert Coyle, SVP Pharma and Healthcare Vertical, Kuhn & Nagel; Martin Drew, SVP Sales and Cargo, Etihad Aviation Group; Thomas Kibb, CEO, Aramex; John Cedric Muse, the Chief of Transport at UNICEF; Tarek Sultan, CEO and Vice Chair at Agility; Wesley P. Wheeler, President at UPS Healthcare; and we invite our moderator for this last panel of the day, Ms. Hadley Gamble, anchor at CNBC. With that said, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Once again, welcome to the WIL Summit. We're going to be talking today about mobilizing global supply chains through integrated logistics solutions. Frankly, we're going to be focusing on just a few aspects of this panel as we're going to be talking about the strategies and technologies to ensure vaccine integrity during that air transport. We're going to talk about overcoming capacity and network shortages. We're also going to be talking about overcoming cold chain challenges as well, cross-border collaboration, and really being able to meet the needs at a most basic level when we're talking about equipment and warehousing as well. Once again, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. It's a thrill to be here. I have to ask, I think, my first question, coming off the back of the massive coverage that we've seen in terms of the choke point, which is right now happening in the Suez Canal. That just shows you on a very basic level how quickly global supply chains can be disrupted, and in a sense also demonstrates that they are still quite vulnerable to external shocks. When you think about this a bit more with regards to the specifics of cold cargo, I want this question to go directly to Martin. How worrying is it to you that as the world slowly gets back on its feet in a post-COVID economy, that we're just not going to have the capacity necessary to move these vaccines in the time required?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever anyone's watching this. Great to be part of this panel. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the, because of the, this is, the logistics challenge of our lifetimes. Yeah, the capacity constraints are a concern. I know that some of the figures that have been put out there in terms of the amount of capacity that's going to be required to move the vaccine. What IATA quoted in terms of the thousands of 747 freighters that are required. It is a key constraint in terms of the distribution of the vaccine. I think when I look at sort of Etihad Cargo and our capabilities and where we sit geographically in terms of Abu Dhabi being our home, And the fact that we are creating Abu Dhabi as a global distribution hub for the vaccine, and very much part of the HOPE consortium. Geographically, Abu Dhabi makes a lot of sense in terms of being a distribution hub for the vaccine, being just a 5-hour flight from 3.5 billion people. So that enables us to reach 170 countries within that 5-hour flight. So therefore, in terms of creating a distribution hub, Abu Dhabi is no better place. And with the capacity that Etihad has, through our large fleet of passenger aircraft as well as dedicated freighters, it means that we are well placed to play our part in terms of the distribution of the vaccine. Also, as well, when I look at sort of the UAE, it's got a proven track record of being able to sort of react quickly in terms of aiding any global crisis. Over the past year, Etihad Cargo has been heavily involved in the distribution of aid on behalf of the Abu Dhabi government. We've carried over 2,500 tons of PPE and medical supplies to 135 countries around the world. So again, we've got a strong sort of capabilities in being able to play our part in the distribution of the vaccine. Also, as well, added to that, the UAE has very advanced infrastructure. So in terms of the capacity to be able to handle the distribution of the vaccine on the ground. And I think with the development and the creation of the HOPE consortium that was created in November last year, bringing together key stakeholders and a consortium that's led by the Abu Dhabi Department of Health, it just means that us coming together as one and providing a full sort of end-to-end solution for the transportation of the vaccine jointly gives us a lot of capacity, and therefore means that we're well placed to play our part.
We're still talking about 8,000 jumbo jets, right? So this is something that is not going to be accomplished with total ease. I want to get now to Bob Coyle and ask you about those kinds of breaks, if you will, in the global supply chain. How creative and innovative have you had to be just to ensure that there's no minimal or ensure minimal breakages in that chain?
Thanks, Hadley, and thanks for having me today on the panel. It's an honor to be part of the HOPE consortium, and we're very excited about working together to ensure supply out to all aspects of the globe. When we talk about creativity and innovation, I think it's a great question. What's funny, when you start thinking about what we're talking about here, I know I've been involved in shipping vaccines for over 22 years, but I always puts a smile on my face because it's only been the last 6 months, 12 months that people have asked about how we do it. So we've been doing pharma healthcare supply chain vaccines for many, many years. And I think us at Kuehne + Nagel have been building our pharma healthcare capability globally to ensure reach. And as part of our overall strategy, we had planned to double the size of the business by 2022. So coming into this, we were ready to go, even though we hadn't planned. I can't say that we planned to have a pandemic as part of our strategy, but I think it was to have that capacity in the network allowed us to really expand and be ready to move this freight when it was when the product was approved. I would say some of the things that changed, though, from a creativity standpoint, many of us in the 3PL logistics field will wait for a customer to bring the RFQ or the idea forward. I think all of us had to maybe get on our front foot here and start to design the supply chain even before the product was ready. And I think that enabled us to be in a position now where we're all moving a lot of the COVID-19 vaccines now out to the different markets. We also had to take an approach. Some of us here have some capability. I know Kuehne + Nagel has a team called QuickStat that does clinical trials, as well as we have our commercial capability in our team. But the whole concept of product life cycle in pharma healthcare has come to life for everyone because we see it every day on the evening news. Connecting a product from idea to clinical trial all the way through commercial product. And to be able to streamline that has become very critical within the supply chain. So I think the capability is there, but now that creativity to leverage that capability to accelerate product to market is coming to bear. I think also from a innovation standpoint, like I said, this capability has been there to move vaccines for years. But what I did see this time last year, a lot of conversation around warehousing. So from an innovation standpoint, we put in, instead of looking at globally, all countries having a warehouse, we put in a whole concept around regional hubs. And having inside the warehouse the capability to handle -70, -20, and 2 to 8, and to be flexible as the product requirements change. We had predicted this time last year around 7 to 10 products in the market. I think we're starting to see that. I think we predicted that there would be multiple ranges of products. We're seeing that now. And our ability to be agile and flexible to handle that is critical. I think also we had put in place temporary storage, and I think that's going to become really important in LATAM and Africa and parts of Asia as well, to be able to handle what we call our temperature pods. For those in logistics, it's about a 20-foot reefer-sized container that can move anywhere in the world and have the flexibility to set different temperatures. And I think it's important from an innovation standpoint that we leverage that flexibility, especially, like I said, into developing markets. And then last but not least, sensor technology. And we talk a lot about it, but leveraging that sensor technology to have humans monitoring the shipments. I think if anything over the last 12 months we've learned is that technology is great, but we're still very much a people business. And being creative on positioning our people to be able to handle this rapid response is very important, Hadley.
Tarek, I want you to weigh in on this one. You've been in the logistics game for quite a while. CNBC in January was reporting that the vaccination efforts had been slowed by logistical problems, specifically with last mile delivery. What have you seen since January that's improved, and what still needs to be done?
So first and foremost, I think the primary problem with vaccines is getting enough of the vaccine to distribute it in the first place. I think, we've had a production constraint that we've all been dealing with. That's not to minimize the last mile constraints that we're seeing even in developed economies. I mean, early on in the US, there were some problems with getting the vaccines out to people because the capacity really wasn't in place to actually to administer the vaccines. And that's something that's not I wouldn't necessarily describe that as a supply chain problem. However, I think what we're seeing now, obviously, with the vaccine production rates building, the attention is going to be shifting towards the emerging markets, and that's obviously where a company like ours really spends a lot of time and effort in putting in capacity and infrastructure to handle the constraints of working in some of these difficult economies, because that's going to be the last, I think, generation. I also believe that there's a lot of standards yet to come into place that are going to basically determine how people are able to travel between countries. I think there's a lot of moving parts here. The EU still doesn't have a policy yet for how vaccinated people will travel. As soon as the policies are out there, I think this will also create both a push and a pull for the demand for people to become vaccinated. Because I think there's still a lot of people, at least in the developed economies, that are reluctant to be vaccinated. As soon as there is an imperative around travel that's linked to your ability to get on a plane and go from a place to another place, I think we'll see that the vaccination rates will quickly improve.
Jean-Cédric, why don't you weigh in on that one in terms of the vaccination rates? Because obviously from your perspective, seeing this as a much more global problem, but also you're dealing much more in emerging markets and in less developed places.
Good afternoon, Hadley, and thank you for inviting UNICEF on this panel, critical panel. As you said, we are experience a lot of constraint statistics. Now, we have to nuance this. It's a new product. The COVAX vaccines is only 1 year old. Since normally on an average, when you introduce a new vaccines, you take 10 years. Why do you need 10 years? Because you need to register the vaccine, you need to test the vaccine, you need to make sure that the host governments are capable to handle. We were talking about storage, we were talking about distribution. So at the moment, since we started with the COVAX facility with WHO, PAHO, and different partners on the alliance, we have reached 63 countries. We have distributed more than 63 countries for around 40 million doses over the world. So it's kind of an achievement if you look at the time spent that we had to deliver these vaccines. This considering also that the industry has been affected by COVID. We cannot rely so much on the commercial airlines that we had in the past. We need to look at equitable dissemination of the vaccine. So we cannot send all the vaccines to one. If you look at a country like Nigeria with a large population, it's not the same thing than Sao Tome with 100 or 250,000 people. So we need to be able to have the vaccines with the low quantities that are being produced at the moment being equitable, dispersed all over the world. And as we said, this is a global pandemic. Everybody is looking at all the different supplies. We have limited supplies. Since the beginning, since the beginning of the COVID, UNICEF has a large experience in pharmaceutical and immunization product procurement. We average procuring $4 to $4.5 billion of supplies that we send to more than 150 countries in the world. But here we're talking about new products. So everybody is looking for the same supplies, and still we are achieving quite a lot of objectives and quite a lot of achievements with all the different partners that we have on the panels and outside with the 3PL service providers. So I think considering all the factors of the industry being a little bit disturbed, considering that everybody looking at the same suppliers, we can consider that we have achieved quite a lot in such a short time. And that's basically the message we need to convey. It's not easy, but the success is there. We're achieving quite a lot by working together and by making sure that we all prioritize the COVAX activities and the COVID-19 vaccine activities. Sorry.
I want to bring in Wesley on this one. It's been suggested that the development of an effective worldwide medical supply chain to deliver these vaccines would be useful. Do you think we're on the road to developing something very much like that at this point? And do you have any suggestions that could move that discussion forward?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer, but we've been involved with the clinical trial since the very beginning. So we had a very, very early start in watching to see how Pfizer was developing their vaccine, and of course Moderna, now Janssen, AZ. We see Novavax coming soon. So we've had a really good look at the clinical aspects, which gives us a lot of clues about how these vaccines should be handled. And one of the reasons why they're being moved at -70 and minus shelf life is really generally unknown. Pfizer has been working really hard. I'm sure Moderna is doing the same, is to get the conditions under which they store and distribute the vaccines at a higher temperature, so they're not so difficult to move around. We're currently looking at moving temporary freezers around the world, and also building freezer farms and control centers around the world to be able to monitor these shipments to make sure they get done within 48 hours. I think that's really important for the vaccines. But as they develop these vaccines and get used to them, they'll see more about how they can be handled easier in the future. I'm also looking at other indications. I know that some of the vaccines are being looked at in a lyophilized format, which is freeze-dried, and powder format, so they're easier to handle. I think that's probably the best answer I can give you at the moment.
Thomas, before we move on from this, I just want to get your sense of what are the major bottlenecks at this point still causing disruptions across the supply chain.
Yes, and I think thanks for having me on this panel, Hadley, much appreciated. And I think Jean made it very clear. This is a fairly new situation in which we're in, and the development of the vaccine, especially also in terms of production, is quite complicated. So it's nothing that you can do just so. And while, for example, Europe has always been a very strong geographical area with a lot of production facilities, I think right now there's about 11 production areas across Europe that basically produce, for example, the 3 approved vaccines. And the first bottleneck is actually getting it produced. And with some of the production sites, I mean, it might start with having actually the right material available to actually produce the number of vaccines that you need at distribution. Then obviously the good thing about Europe is, for example, then it's a border-free region, and you typically have to think about an end-to-end supply chain from really pick up at production to really delivering it to the point of vaccination. And I think this is where the complications are, because it's quite complicated to have an integrity of the supply chain, especially under the cooling conditions, really secured all the way through. And any bottleneck, and you gave the example about the Suez, and these things might happen in smaller dimensions as well every day. But these are some of the complications that might happen, and then getting it actually down to the infrastructure that each European country is deploying when doing the vaccination might add another complication to it, because there is a big difference as to how it's conducted across different countries in Europe, for example.
You know what also causes complications? Politics. And Europe, sadly, has just not managed to get it together so far. I know you can't comment on that specifically, but what can the private sector do, in your view, when the politics just get in the way?
I think as a sector, I think we are quite used to actually collaboration across various steps in the supply chain. And I think it speaks to all my fellow panelists here that we're actually quite used in leveraging each other's capacities, which is basically, so I think the industry per se, and Robert made a very good point. I mean, it's not that we're doing this since yesterday only or since the pandemic started. So I think we're very much aware as to which capability we have across the different geographies, across the different modes of transportation, be it air, be it land, be it sea. We know exactly as to how we can work together with airlines like Etihad with Martin. So I think there's a lot we can do to just demonstrate as to we're ready. So we're ready when you need us. And we can really do it and support production. We can do it to support the final vaccination places. And I think the more we can work together actually with politics on just creating, let's say, the necessary conditions for us to operate, I think the better. And just one example, I mean, if you're crossing borders, then there's a lot of paperwork involved, and some of that paperwork clearly comes from the authorities. So wherever politics can help us to basically lower these barriers in the interest of a seamless supply chain performance, the better.
Martin, I want to bring you in on this one in terms of what we still don't know, in a sense. Obviously, working through the last several months with the HOPE Consortium, with the COVAX initiative as well. I mean, as you say, there have been a lot of progress in terms of close collaboration between the public and the private sector, between various governments. But at the same point, there are still things that need to be addressed. In your view, what's the main challenge to your company as well as the wider industry when you're working to resolve these things and find the best way forward? Because obviously, this is an industry that's under significant pressure as a result of COVID-19.
Indeed. And I think as my fellow panelists have outlined some of the challenges. I think, look, from our side, our view is that, of course, there's several challenges, and I think forums such as this really helps us to bring these sort of these discussions to a higher level where we can talk through how we can address some of these problems. And I think, again, as some of my fellow panelists have outlined, partnership is key to addressing a lot of these issues. Again, as has already been mentioned, some of the challenges around vaccine availability and having enough vaccine for the world's population. And we know the vaccine manufacturers are working hard to ensure that supply is available. Another, and I think what UNICEF is doing is a great thing in terms of making sure that there is availability of the vaccine. There's equitable available of vaccine around the world, especially in some of those remote locations where and what we've been doing is working again along with the UAE government and of course with the humanitarian air freight initiative by UNICEF to ensure that equitable sort of distribution of the vaccine is being achieved. Also, as well, again, what's so key, of course, is maintaining products integrity in terms of vaccine integrity. And that's only done through specialized supply chain solutions, which requires infrastructure, which requires, of course, the right type of capabilities, certified processes to ensure that the vaccines are being transported at the right temperatures. Again, we sort of look to what's been created as in terms of the HOPE Consortium, bringing together various sort of Abu Dhabi stakeholders, of course. Many sort of international logistics companies, many on this panel that are providing that full end-to-end solution. From an Etihad perspective, this is the pharmaceutical vertical is a vertical we've been involved in for a number of years. So I think we've been well positioned to live up to this challenge. And this is something that we're very focused on playing our part. In addition to that, the network that we have is wide-reaching, and ensuring that we, through our charter capabilities as well, means that we can get to those countries that we maybe don't operate scheduled services to, but having the charter capabilities to do it. So I think key in terms of to getting over these challenges, as I said, is partnerships, is these sort of forums to talk through the issues and come up with solutions.
How tough has it been as an airline, in the sense that obviously all airlines are sharing the same story? I mean, shedding thousands and thousands of workers across the chain. How tough has it been to do what you guys are trying to do, with the fact that you've had to sadly say goodbye to so many of your employees?
It's been tough. It's been tough. Yeah, I mean, I have I have responsibility for both passenger sales as well as cargo, and obviously they're two very contrasting businesses at the moment. On the passenger side, as we know, it's been an incredibly tough 12 months. There are some signs of improvement. I think what is key is obviously the continued rollout of the vaccination programs, the move to some sort of standardized sort of international protocol as relates to digital passports to enable travel to really start again. But then on the cargo side of the business, against as a combination carrier with a backdrop of what's going on the passenger side, it has made it tough. But what we've really done is ensured that we continue to focus on cargo and to continue to leverage what has been a relatively strong market conditions on the cargo side of the business, and of course not only sort of ensuring that we played our part in terms of the distribution of PPE last year, but now moving into the global distribution of the vaccine. Cargo for Etihad has really been a lifeline throughout this crisis, and I have no doubt it will continue to be a lifeline for the rest of 21 and well into 22.
Tarek, walk me through the nitty-gritty when it comes to ensuring vaccine integrity. So many of these vaccines have to have the sub-freezing temperatures. Is there any measure that border agencies could be taking at this point to ensure that integrity?
Well, I think that integrity needs to come through the supply chain. We use a lot of IoT devices to track the health of the products in transit, and I think the way that the health authorities kind of operate at the border, they're not really set up to necessarily handle those quality aspects of the shipment. So that's something that we need to do and actually deliver it to the end customer. But one of the things I wanted to point out is every time we get the logistics guys together, it's always a doom and gloom. Something's bad is happening to get everybody on this panel. But there's been some really positive things coming out of this, and I think we need to point those out. And I mean, one of them is we talked about collaboration. Wesley helped me out earlier in the year on a couple of ideas. The government of Abu Dhabi is doing a fantastic job collaborating, creating an ecosystem to collaborate with researchers around pharma as well. Secondly, we've created a capacity to actually develop this product in real time. I mean, this capacity didn't exist in the past. So out of this crisis, we now have a situation where we have pharma companies that can create vaccines at an expedited pace. We didn't have that before. Supply chain has kind of been put into, I would say, a certain perspective. Then we have the experience of the stakeholders of actually dealing with a crisis like this. And then finally, the selectivity, the testing, and that's going to be a growing area of technology as we develop. So the combination of all of those factors is actually going to make this, we're going to be in a better place at the end of this for the next virus that comes out.
Wesley, weigh in on that one, as Tarek was saying, in terms of helping him out with some ideas. What do you see are some of the major technological advances at this point that have been made as a result of the pandemic? And to ensure a truly optimized supply chain for these deliveries, what more needs to be done?
Well, I'll shout out for our airline. Of course, we are one of the largest airlines in the world, and we are dedicated to cargo. That's all we do. So we utilize our network around the world. We have some 280 our aircraft of our own. We have another 300 or 400 on charter at any given time. We're moving 25 to 30 million packages a day. It's a big network. So the technology we have already is actually quite. To go back to Rob's point earlier, we already know how to do this. We do this every year with the flu vaccine. I think the technology advances that I see now that are really important is as we move these vaccines at -20 for a while until they get to 2 to 8 degrees, more like refrigerated. We're relying a lot on the packaging to make sure that the vaccines arrive within 48 to 72 hours within stability. So the packaging has actually come quite far along in terms of how well that package can maintain temperature for a period of time. We validate the packaging for 72 hours, sometimes 56. But I think it's the packaging and it's the tracking technology. Rob mentioned that earlier. We can now track packages worldwide anytime, 24/7, except for the periods of time it's in the air. Otherwise, we can see it all the time. So technology is really tracking, packaging, and of course, the stability of our network itself.
I wanted to bring Jean-Cedric, in on this, because when we talk about the vaccine distribution, it's not just the vaccines themselves. We're also talking about the need for syringes and the safety boxes necessary as well to keep the integrity of these vaccines. When you think about that in terms of the availability and distribution of syringes and safety boxes, is this what you're seeing in line with the availability even of vaccines, or are we coming up on a real big problem?
Thank you, because this is really music to my ears. We always talk about the vaccines, but we cannot not organize any campaigns without the auxiliaries, without the devices, without the safety boxes. So it's really important that we have a timely delivery of vaccines and the syringes and all the auxiliaries. And it's really important, even more important now we were mentioned Suez, we mentioned the problems of accessibility to TEUs, to containers out of Asia. Most of our supplies of devices are coming from Asia, from India. We have problems to have accessibility to containers. We don't want to ship devices by air, because this is basically transporting air and it's really costly. So we already pre-procured with the COVAX, with Gavi, we procured a lot of syringes that we had already sent in advance, but we still need to have more access to containers to ship as much as possible. It's really important because what we have at the moment is a global awareness and a global sensitivity to send the COVID vaccine as soon as possible. But we have also routine immunization programs that are ongoing in most of the countries. And we cannot jeopardize one by taking the devices to prioritize the COVID vaccines and then creating stockouts of routine immunization and having maybe potentially outbreaks of measles, outbreaks of yellow fever in different countries. So it's really important to have that timely activity of vaccines and devices going at the country office level, at all the countries, level. And then working with the authorities, and it has been mentioned by my fellow colleagues here on the panel, the customs issues. We're talking about air shipments versus sea shipment. These are different processes. And the process of air shipment is sometimes faster than sea freight. So we're working a lot with the local authorities to make sure of these problems we can face and to fast track as much as possible the release of the devices to make sure that we can organize the campaign, supporting with WHO, with Gavi, with all the partners, supporting the Minister of Health in organizing the campaigns as much as possible.
Robert, I want you to come in on that one, just in terms of the logistics of this. Where do you see the bottlenecks in this that could potentially be sorted?
That's a great question, Hadley. And Jean-Cedric, thanks for music to my ears as well when we talk about COVID-19 products, because the syringes are just as important. And I know 28,800 syringes on a pallet, right? And then we have to coordinate that activity with the vaccines. So I think, Hadley, that's one of the most important things, is that the COVID-19 response is the vaccine and all corresponding components that go into it. As I listen to the panel, I hear a lot of partnership. I'm going to take it to the next level, say it's collaboration and communication. And in our industry, for the folks that have been in pharma healthcare for as long as I have, we work in a regulated environment. And in a regulated environment, all the parties, manufacturers, 3PLs, governments, wholesalers, the industry organizations like WTO, we like to work in absolute data. And I think one of the biggest advantages I think is going to come out of this is that the last 12 months we've had to work more in an iterative environment. And I think we've had to be comfortable in an iterative environment, working with maybe data that wasn't perfect. And Wes said it very well, as far as the products that are coming into the market are changing, right? There's going to be a second gen, there's going to be a third gen of these products that have better stability. So I think, Hadley, to answer your question, I think some of the overall supply chain areas is how are we communicating, how are we sharing information? There's been also conversations on the politics. I'll turn it into trade policy. And I think the WTO has done a great job in publishing a paper a couple of weeks ago that talked about some key areas that we need to make sure we ensure supply on, ensure alignment on, I should say, because a lot of the conversation's been on US, Europe, but that's only 12, 14% of the global population. We've got a long way to go. And ensuring that we communicate on data, information, clinical data, R&D data is important. We talked about the airlines, 3PLs. Let's make it easy getting across border. Make sure that paperwork's not there. And John Cedric, I'm glad you said the sea logistics as well. It's not just air, but for the corresponding components. And then, everyone's going to talk about cold chain, but making sure that the countries are starting to do their design in cold chain now. That's where the governments can really help, because that is potentially a bottleneck area. But we've seen so far in all the product that we've moved globally, really good collaboration. The countries are coming to the table. I'd say two suggestions I have for the countries, for those that are out there, is we've done this before, right? Let's not overcomplicate the Incoterms and the ownerships of the goods, where we have a different supply chain for every country. That'll only create bottlenecks into our supply chain, especially when we're hubbing a lot of this product into the market. So allow the manufacturers to own that product down into the country. And then secondly is just give yourself that flexibility. You heard Wes talk about freezer farms. I talked about temperature pods, but make sure that you have the capability and the capacity to handle these products well into your supply chain so that we can maintain the efficacy of the drug, because that's the most important thing to the patient, right? Our job is to make sure that there is no noise. And I heard, Tarek, you said doom and gloom. I always tell people this: most of us on this panel have probably ordered from Amazon or other companies. How often do you call them when they get it right? Probably never. But you do call them when they get it wrong. And that's what we do, right? And so sometimes you got to thank yourself in this supply chain. But today it's very clear what we're doing. We're delivering products to patients, and it's our job to be no noise to the patient.
Thomas, weigh in on that one from your perspective.
No, absolutely. And let me double down on what Robert was saying. I think if the pandemic has shown one thing is as to what this planet is capable of doing, because all of us will agree that obviously we were forced to become real innovative and creative. And one example is we're having this video conference that we wouldn't have had unless we had been forced to do it. And I think typically in times of crisis, mankind is at its best to come up with creative solutions. And I have to say, I think you see what can happen if some small things go wrong, as we've seen in Suez. So I think we need to give some credit to the industry as such, because as all of us have said, I mean, we are used to building supply chains across continents, across different types of product, in collaborating with each other, in leveraging technology. And I think this is one of the reasons why we're all in this industry, because it's a very exciting industry. It's a playground for innovation and technology, and that's as true for the COVID vaccine as it is with others. I think the level of collaboration, the level of visibility within the supply chain is certainly something that can always be improved. But I think if there's something that obviously we should take into the coming years as a mandate, is to keep that level of collaboration and keep pushing the boundaries on how we can further improve the efficiencies of the supply chain because this is something that could well happen in any other way. So as we have said pre-COVID, I mean, never take anything for granted, but just be vigilant and be prepared to kind of step up the plate.
Absolutely. And I mean, at the end of the day, though, you know, private companies do need to make their numbers. They do need to have a balanced balance sheet. Tarek, walk us through how you balance the two, because we're talking a lot about collaboration, thinking outside the box, working outside the box, and being willing to try a different approach, if you will.
So, you know, our business has been a mixed bag. Obviously, the supply chain business has done fairly well. And we've had to scramble to find creative solutions for our customers to work around these bottlenecks. Generally, for a supply chain specialist, that's that's a sort of environment where they excel and they can come up with their best most creative decisions. Other parts of the business, obviously, were devastated by COVID. Ground handling businesses at the airports, et cetera, in the emerging markets. You can imagine with the way passenger flights were shut down, they had quite an impact. But where we've actually been really focusing is in the area of technology. We've been investing in some early stage technologies that are going to really come out of this, I think, in a much better way. I mean, these are companies that are kind of in the area of sustainability, in the area of lighting companies that kind of can kill and detect COVID. All kinds of ideas that are coming out that we wouldn't have heard of them beforehand. But we have the business and we actually enjoy engaging with entrepreneurs that have ideas like that. So we're seeing a lot of new technologies that are kind of in their nascent stages that are going to be changing the way things work down the future. I think now is a good time to be investing in them and kind of incorporating them into your core business offering for your customers.
And Wesley, I mean, weigh on this one as well, because whether you're a private company or a publicly created company, obviously anything ESG is pretty sexy at the moment. So it's not a difficult sell, is it?
No, I mean, I have to say, we got involved building this supply chain for the United States back in April. We started working with the Health and Human Services Group, and then, of course, Operation Warp Speed was formed. We became part of the leadership team, working with General Perna and his whole team in Washington. I have to say, I've never seen a better partnership between public and private companies. They had to design a data flow system that would allocate every single jurisdiction in the U.S. plus all the Pacific Islands to make sure that there was an equitable distribution within the U.S. And it worked extremely well. The data sources came from CDC through Operation Warp Speed all the way to McKesson, Pfizer, of course, UPS and FedEx, and it all happened within 24 hours. So every single week we get another allocation. The data flows down, and within 24 hours we have the doses at point of use. It's been an incredible partnership. And I have to say, I give the new administration a lot of credit here because they didn't change a thing. The process works, it continues to work, and to this day, we've now moved 150 million doses, 100 million of those in the US at 99.97% on time. So it's been an incredible experience for me, and we're very proud to be part of it.
Jean-Cedric, take that for us and make that a bit more global within your experience, trying to do this for UNICEF and sort of navigating the global response. Obviously, a lot of lessons learned in a very short period of time. But Wesley was talking about what happens when the government really gets it right, and the private sector, frankly, is able to work with them. More globally, how concerned should we be?
As my colleague said, this is not new. We've been delivering and procuring pharmaceutical and immunization products for decades. On a yearly basis, UNICEF procures more than 2 billion doses of vaccines. Our commitment with Gavi, with COVAX, with WHO and PAHO is to add 2 billion doses for 2021 to deliver to 52 countries. So, but most of the countries with whom we're working they're organizing immunization campaign on a yearly basis, regular routine campaigns. So it's once again, it's just a supply chain that you need to tweak a little bit and to make sure that it's coordinated. You cannot ship everything at the same moment, because then you're going to overload the warehouses and the central storages. We have worked with different partners, with the private sector, with the regular suspects like WHO, the Minister of Health, to assess the capacity, to really look at the readiness capacity of our different consignors, of the different countries where we will ship the supplies. And at the moment it works because we are coordinated, but we need to make sure that we all coordinate in the same way, that we have a prioritization for COVID and COVAX commodities, because we still need the protection. We cannot organize a campaign with only the devices, the vaccine. We still need protective equipment for the health takers that are organizing the campaigns. And at the moment, as I said earlier, we have reached 63 countries around the world. We have shipped more than 40 million doses of vaccines. So it might not be at the pace we expect. Why? Because we are talking about a new product that everybody looks at, that the production is what it is at the moment. We have still difficulties of the supply chain, but looking at the global, it goes better than we were expecting. At 1 month, in 1 month, we have reached 63 countries. So this is the partnership, this is the prioritization. We're working with IATA, we're working with WF, we're working with all the panel colleagues here to make sure that we prioritize all the supplies, and then working mostly with the Minister of Health to make sure that the supplies are not staying at the central level and that they are distributed to the population at risk. As a priority, we aim at 20% of the population, but now we're getting more and more partnership to make sure that we have more quantities being sent to the country. So it's basically a supply chain that you tweak. We have the experience, we just need to adapt a little bit with all the constraints we experience, like Suez, like all the commercial airlines that are affected also. So it's just working together, coordinating and prioritizing.
Before I let you gentlemen go, I want to go around the group and just ask for a final question. And I'll start with Martin, actually. When you think about this with regards to the greatest challenge in the immediate term for the vaccination distribution, we're talking a lot more broadly about vaccine nationalism. We're talking about how wealthier countries are more than happy often to contribute money to something like the Will Forum or the Hope Consortium, and at the same time not be as generous perhaps in taking vaccines and distributing them themselves to those who aren't their citizens. When you think about this, though, from the logistics side of things, what is the greatest and most immediate challenge that you guys as a group are trying to meet at this point?
I suppose it comes out, as we've mentioned, it's about that sort of equitable sort of distribution of the vaccine, and then as a result of that, it's trying to get those vaccines into some of these developing countries. And then the challenges that come with that, of course, is the limited infrastructure in these countries. And you know, that in itself, of course, creates a challenge because of the temperature requirements. But again, I think maybe that, I don't know, hopefully this word hasn't been overused today, but it is key. It comes down to partnerships, it comes down to collaboration to ensure that you know, we come up with solutions to be able to ensure that cool chain is maintained even in countries where the infrastructure is so limited. I know that, and I'm sure Cedric can comment on this. UNICEF is already installing sort of cold boxes through its COVAX program, and also in addition to that, in terms of because of the consequence of limited last mile infrastructure. What's really important is that when you're sending the vaccines into some of these countries that have that limited infrastructure, is that you're drip feeding the vaccines into these points rather than sending millions of doses, which you know they're not going to be able to handle. It's about sending the volumes in at the right levels that then can be administered, and then you keep on topping up. And that for me is, I think, is one of the most challenging parts of the global distribution of the vaccine is ensuring that there is that equitable distribution, but then importantly ensuring that the supply chain is maintained when distributing into some of these developing countries.
Tarek?
So one of the risks that I think we need to be cognizant of is whenever something goes wrong in a country, the decision making kind of gravitates towards the local perspective. So if you take the EU, for example, there's no clear policy on how travel will be reopened in the future. So I think one of the things that we're going to have to look at is how do we take some of these decisions and kind of gravitate them towards a more sort of standards-driven collective, as opposed to the situation where we're in now, where different ministers of health in each country are driving requirements for how people should travel and move and around the world. I think maybe there's going to be some technology that's going to be required to actually give the health authorities the comfort they need to actually start opening up again. But I see that kind of as a step backwards from where we were in the past to kind of a global standard.
Robert?
I think what I'll say here is we talk a lot about, and you're on the news, follow the science on the product. I think from a logistics standpoint, let's follow the logistics data. So Jan Sendra, you said earlier, 2 billion doses. That's about 17,000 pallets of vaccine. That's about 69,000 pallets of syringes. We've all shipped more than that in the time that we started this webinar. So we can do this, right? I think we just need to make sure that we're leading with the right data, get that data out there, and let's not create fear across the logistics supply chain. Let's just get this done. We do it today and we could do it tomorrow. And this is when everyone's watching. So what a great opportunity for all of us to get the product out into the world.
Wesley?
Yeah, I'm going to build on that a little bit. So we're delivering now to 41 countries, and we're actually working, of course, with COVAX and somewhat with UNICEF and many, many countries. What I'm seeing is that all the countries are acting a little bit differently. Okay, for the low and middle and the lower income countries that COVAX is dealing with is one thing, because they're helping them a lot with logistics. But some of the more developing countries are taking their own stand on how to do this. And from a logistics standpoint, sometimes they think they know better, and they don't necessarily know better. So I'm not going to name countries, but some countries decide that all they want is to deliver the pallets to the door at the end of the airstrip, and they'll take it from there. And then they have to worry about last mile. Then they have to get involved with other folks. They should really rely on Kuehne+Nagel and FedEx and DHL and UPS to really figure this out for them. This is not difficult. What makes it a little bit unique is just the temperature requirements. We've talked about that a lot. But aside from the temperature issues, this is just normal logistics, and they have to really rely on the experts to do this right.
Thomas?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm thinking more end-to-end and more practical as to what happens on the last mile. And I think this is an opportunity clearly for the private-public partnership, because I think it's not so much in the supply chain as all of my common panelists have said, but really what happens, to really make sure that even the last mile is really covered. And this is where I think together with institutions from UNICEF to any of the medical, World Health Organization, and our logistics operations, we can basically secure that an end-to-end process is happening even under the most adverse conditions. We know how to operate in difficult environments from a logistics company standpoint, but certainly I think it's still something to equip the clinics, the doctors, the nurses in all of these stations around the globe, developed countries, not so much developed countries, with the right expertise and awareness that the injection can happen in the end.
Jean-Cédric?
I don't think I need much to add much. I think my fellow panelists have said everything, but maybe the last thing that needs to be said maybe is the fact that we have all the experience and we all basically partner in this. And it's when we're talking about the developing countries, they have the accountability, they know how to do it. So basically, let's put all these resources to support them. and build the future, and making sure that we have a future perfect immunization supply chain, and not creating parallel system, because at the end, the parallel system will need to be integrated in the Ministry of Health supply chain. And that's basically the goal. With all the innovation, with all the system, with all the partnership we have, we need to help the government to be able to do themselves in the future, because there's not going to be the last time we have such an outbreak. And I hope it is the last, but we fear that it will come again, and we need to have that lesson learned and making sure that we have the capacity to handle it at country office level, at country level, and by themselves in the future with limited external support.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. I just want to thank you all so much for joining us on behalf of the Will Summit, as well as the Hope Consortium and CNBC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Take care. Bye now.
That was another insightful session. We thank Mr. Robert Coyle, Martin Drew, Thomas Skip, John Cedric Muse, and Tariq Sultan, Wesley P. Wheeler, and thank you to Hadley Gamble for moderating. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and that draws day one of the World Immunization and Logistics Summit to a close. We hope you had an engaging and enjoyable first day, and we look forward to welcoming you back tomorrow morning. That is our promise. And until then, enjoy your evening, and please stay safe. Have a good one.
To watch all the sessions from the World Immunization and Logistics Summit, click the link